Well, a new administration takes over and immediately goes to work on shaking things up. Joe Biden has big plans for the minimum wage. What could that mean for you? And the forecast? It's raining executive orders in Washington, D.C. These topics, plus our one on one with former Trump administration official Sery Kim, today on the BizPo Show. Welcome to the BizPo Show. I'm Dan Geltrude in New York City, joined by my co-host, Seth Denson in Dallas, Texas. Seth, how are things down south today?
Dan, they're sunny and nice and certainly not cold. It's the great thing of living in the South in the winter, man. But nice lead-in, by the way. I'm kind of anxious about all these topics. I'm certainly anxious to talk to Sery Kim, too.
Well, that's going to be fantastic. I mean, Sery is... she's very special, put it that way, and I think our audience is really in for a treat.
I couldn't agree more.
So, hey, let's get started. Let's talk about the minimum wage, Seth. So, Joe Biden, one of the first things he's promising right out of the gate is we are going to have a $15 minimum wage. Federal. That means across the board, every state in the country will have to raise their minimum wage to $15 an hour. So think about this. If you have a state that's at $7.50, let's say, automatic doubling of the minimum wage. You think that's a good idea?
It's a terrible idea. And listen, I'm all about having a conversation about possibly raising the minimum wage. We can have that discussion. I personally am more of a fan of each state being able to make the determination for their state based on their economics, their standards of living, cost of living, all of those types of things. But to do this at a federal level, and to the point you just made, Dan, this would be doubling it in some states. I think that this is very short-sighted. I think this is a typical politician trying to buy some votes here. But the reality is this is going to have sweeping detrimental impact to the economy as we know it. And that's an economy that is already in a position not to be able to take a big hit right now, in large part because small business owners won't be able to afford this. They'll have to do a number of things: cut hours, cut jobs, or just cut out of business.
Well, I'm going to add something to that, Seth, and I'm going to say this. Joe Biden has promised that taxes are not going up for anyone making over $400,000. Well, this is a case where that's simply not going to be true, because raising the minimum wage is in fact a tax, in my opinion, because it's the government stepping into, let's say, a small business and say, you must pay this. Now, anytime the government says you must pay, I'm thinking tax. So that's the first problem. The second problem is when you have a business that is paying someone, let's say, $7.50 to keep the math easy, and now they have to jump up to $15 an hour because of the new federal minimum wage. Seth, what happens to the person who's making $15 an hour? Do they now jump to $30? This wage compression that will also take place, I think, is one of the great dangers in raising the minimum wage, because it has a domino effect for all employees.
Well, that's right. And, we've talked about inflation a number of times, Dan, and how the federal debt is going to play into that at some point. But this is also going to play into it as well, because as you just mentioned, not only does the wage shift have to happen up, and that sounds good on Sunday morning talk shows, but what they don't realize, that means everything goes up, right? That small business owner, that pizza you're getting for $10, it's not $10 anymore. It can't be. It's got to be $12, $13, $14, or even higher. Everything we buy will go up as a result. So the $15, $20 an hour employee, their buying power for that 20 hours just went away immensely. And as we think about this, we don't have to look all that far to see the negative impacts of this level of minimum wage hikes. I mean, recently, or in the last few years, the state of Washington raised their minimum wage to $15, and immediately the economy was impacted. Economists have done many analysis of this, and it's estimated that there's about 3.7 million jobs that were lost as a result of this minimum wage hike. And the hours that while jobs that weren't lost, even the hours were cut to the tune of 7%. So those remaining jobs, they still lost wages because they lost hours. And so as we think about that, and we start thinking about this on a national scale, you have to start to understand that things that are in Washington are not that far removed from the rest of the world. And Washington already had a higher standard of living. What happens when you do this in Mississippi?
It's clearly a problem. But you know what, Seth? Let's be fair about this. Let's look at the other side of what people are saying. Is that people need to make at least $15 an hour, this minimum standard to be able to live. And I think we're compassionate people, and we understand that, we don't want to have people living in poverty. So the question becomes, how do we really address that issue other than just raising the minimum wage? Do you have some thoughts on that?
Well, I think we have to start taking a deeper look at the cost of doing business in our country and the regulatory structure. The more the government has these standard level of requirements, everything from health care under the ACA to payroll taxes and all these other things, there's a misconception out there that if that money wasn't being spent on those things, it would just go to line the business owners' pockets. No, it wouldn't. It would go back into the wages of its staff. And this hindrance for small businesses to get launched, I think we've got to cut regulation, we've got to cut red tape. That's ultimately what's going to help. By boosting these economies, we create competition in these economies. And in a free market, it's competition that will drive wages up. Federal involvement, as it is always shown, decreases competition and decreases the wealth in communities that drive wages down.
I agree with you, Seth. I believe that the free market should always be what determines something like wages. And I just think, although we understand that we don't want people living in poverty, the goal of the minimum wage is just somewhere to start. You have to build yourself up from that point. You got to be trained, you have to learn, you have to advance. That's how you make more money, not sitting back and waiting for the federal government to give you a raise just because.
Well, Dan, and you make a great point. Let me close with this thought. The jobs that are going to be lost are those entry-level jobs you're talking about. Those are our people that are entering the workforce tomorrow that aren't going to get that job. Those people that need that after-school job. Those kids that are going through school, working their way through school. The ones that are coming out of school and needing to get jobs. Or even those families that are trying to supplement their income, even if it's more than the minimum wage, with a minimum wage jobs. Those are the things that are going to be lost, and I think that will have a detrimental impact on our economy in 10, 20, 30 years and beyond.
Well, let's leave it there for now, because next up, former Trump administration official Sery Kim, right after this.
Welcome back to the BizPo Show. Our guest this week is attorney and former assistant administrator of the SBA under the Trump administration, Sery Kim. She's also a friend of mine, by the way. Sery, thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, and great to see you, Dan.
Same here, Sery. Thanks for coming on.
Hey, real quick, and we've got some hard-hitting questions, right? Which I know you're not foreign to, but I'm just, this week or this past week, if you woke up this morning or even over the last few mornings, just kind of stretched and gone, okay, now what? Because, I mean, from a perspective, I got to think that in your role in the Trump administration, it was pretty intense. I mean, it's every day, it's go, 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 especially during PPP and rollout and our economic situation. Was it just like a pressure valve just released over the last week?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, emotionally and physically, it was two different things. I mean, physically, it was nice just to kind of downshift and not spend 20 hours a day focused on how can I help America? I'm one of those true believers that really is passionate about public policy. So it was nice just to be able to sleep 8 hours a night, quite frankly. But emotionally, I feel like so many Republicans do, which is that our work was left undone. And as y'all have mentioned several times, it really wasn't called until way after election day. And so for a period of time, we were all emotionally spent. I felt like I was in an abusive relationship with the electorate. Like I didn't know what was going on and what was happening, but we still had so much work to get done. And now there's a part of me that is sad, but there's definitely a part of me that's more determined than ever to take back the White House in 2024, but definitely Congress in 2022.
Excellent. Well, listen, why don't you tell our viewers and listeners kind of what your role was at the SBA?
So I was an assistant administrator at the SBA, and basically what that meant was I was not Senate confirmed, but had just enough power to like influence people's lives or make it worse. And I focused mainly on the issues of women empowerment. My office was the Office of Women's Business Ownership, and what we did is we took approximately $100 million of the American taxpayers' money, and we had a really high return on investment, where for every dollar we spent, we were able to really educate and train almost 200,000 women. And last year alone, we started over 2,000 businesses. So I'm really proud of the fact that I was able to work on that issue. And thankfully for me, I did not have the PPP portfolio.
So, well, that was going to be my next question. Was there any responsibility of yours within the PPP program? And since you've just kind of answered that and said no, not really, let me ask you this maybe from an opinion perspective then, which was, did the PPP help out those specific businesses in any way that you were assisting in your role?
So let me bifurcate that answer. So the first part is, yes, PPP definitely helped. I mean, I think if you have such a great cash infusion, and we saw almost $500 billion, it wasn't possible for it not to help. It's not like the waste, fraud, and abuse was systemic throughout. We know, because the numbers are certain and because they're publicly available, that literally millions of jobs were saved. But the second part of that is the actual administration of the PPP. As most everybody knows, no one knew what government agency I worked at until the pandemic hit. I mean, I was the most popular person in the world because they were like, oh, SBA? Whoa, PPP money, right? I mean, it's not because I'm charming and smart. They were like, oh, I know exactly what that is. But brass tacks, from a government administration standpoint, the SBA typically has about like 800 employees. And as a result of PPP and CARES Act and EIDL, they scaled up to almost 9,000. So you can imagine that as a crisis is going on in the external world, there was, quite frankly, a crisis in the internal world of government, because we had to scale to meet the largest cash outlay the SBA has ever given in 60 years of their existence.
Sery, I was really involved with the PPP process on behalf of my clients. And when it was happening, it literally was so crazy. And, everybody was in a rush to try to receive that money because these small businesses really needed it. At the same time, the government was in the process of basically building the airplane as they were flying. So given the I really thought that the PPP program was an incredible success, especially because not only was it was so big, it had to be done so quickly. So now we're still in the pandemic. Our economy is still struggling. Do you think that the next round of PPP will be as successful as the first? And do you think this is going to be a continuing program in the Biden administration until we do get over the hurdle?
So I'll unpackage that into three parts with the last part. So the last part is the Biden administration will definitely continue it. It's too popular. It's already in place. And the second round funding application finishes on February 15th. So the step before that is, yes, absolutely. It was really, really challenging to get this program into place. And I think people like you who helped clients, there were lots of versions of you, Dan, even though you're the one and only Dan Gertrude, who went out of their way to understand and interpret these regulations and help them, because it was very much uncertain terrain. But the number one takeaway that I would say is that I don't think PPP is going to be successful in the second round for one reason. It's because in the last 10 to 11 months, what we have seen is it doesn't matter how much money you have, it matters how the government works, from the local government all the way up to the federal government. We gave restaurants PPP money, but if they're shut down for like 8 out of 11 months, PPP money isn't going to keep them in business. We saw fitness and gym owners in New Jersey that became really famous because all they wanted to do was open their business. And in order to make money and stay in business, they had to defy government rules, right? PPP can only give you money. They can't give you a career. And I think this is where Republicans and Democrats need to get their act together and provide certainty for businesses, because big business, small business, it doesn't matter who you are. You can only be successful if you have certainty.
Well, that's actually a great segue, Sery, into my next question, because I was going to say, as far as looking back on the PPP program, if you could get a do-over in how it was done, what would you do differently?
Well, I'm certainly available to be SBA administrator, so the Biden administration can call me if they want to. Um,
And they
but,
should.
but I would say the number one change that the PPP loan money should have done is that they should have focused on small businesses with 10 to less. Because what Congress failed to realize when they wrote that bill is the definition of a small business, according to the US Small Business Administration, is 500 or less. So if you're at the 100, 200, 300 employee business, you can afford big law firms. You can afford lobbyists. You can afford people to interpret what is going on in Washington, D.C., to put you in the position that no matter what the regulation or loan program that comes out of Washington, D.C., you'll be successful. But if you have 5 employees, 6 employees, 7 employees, you honestly don't care what Washington, D.C. does until you pay your quarterly taxes. You only want them to stay out of your way. And those are the people who had no capability to be assisted by the PPP, because those larger small businesses took first tranche. So if I could do anything over again, if I am the future SBA administrator, I would say that law should have been written to address the 10 or less small employees first.
Sery, along those same lines, right, you've been advising and talking to business owners in that small business arena for a while. The incoming Biden administration has released a tax plan, or at least their proposed tax plan, with the intent of raising taxes specifically to those, they say, making over $400,000 a year. Now, to a lot of people, that's a lot of money, and certainly it is, but that also is a lot of small business owners who are already in a challenged position based on 2020 and the impact of coronavirus and shutdowns. And so, based on that, what advice would you give? And well, maybe two parts question. What advice would you give to these organizations? And do you think that this is helpful for the economy at this point?
Absolutely not helpful. For that one word I keep emphasizing, certainty. You cannot create a recovered economy if there continues to be uncertainty. Changes in tax code, whatever it looks like, is uncertainty. But more important to that, the IRS is like any other government agency. They don't have a lot of people working there. You wondered why you didn't get your first round stimulus check? It was all run by the IRS. You wonder why your second round stimulus check isn't coming? It's all run by the IRS. You wonder why you didn't get your PPP funds? Well, you needed your core tax documents from the IRS. The IRS is not the lifesaver of what is wrong with government and what is wrong with stimulating our economy. The problem in making our economy get better is bad politicians. And so the last thing that we need is more uncertainty. We don't need any new tax laws. All we need is for government to just say, open up, let people get back to work, let kids go back to school, and just everybody take the COVID vaccine. That's it. Pretty easy.
So, Siri, just recently, Governor Cuomo came out talking about the fact that he needs $15 billion from the federal government, or he's going to have to raise taxes in his state once again just to meet his budget shortfalls, of which he still can't meet, actually. But this highlights to me a bigger challenge that states are having, specifically states like New York, Illinois, California, that are seeing a mass migration of not only their citizens, but their businesses to states like Texas and Arizona and Florida. What do states need to do to get their acts together to end this? Or is this just going to be a change that we continue to see because these blue state governors just aren't going to get out of their own way?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not Elon Musk, but I could tell you businesses exist to make money. They're not there to be your friend. And if businesses want to make money, they're going to go to states where they have the lowest income tax, where they have the lowest ability to bring in goods from another country, export import laws. Go to states where they actually can hire employees because the market is competitive. There's a reason why New Jersey had such a massive shortfall as a result of the current governor's decisions. It's because the largest hedge fund in the world moved to Florida. I mean, if you have companies, if you have people remove themselves from a tax high state to go to a tax low state, you're not going to be able to pay your bills. So governors need to sort out, do they want to pay their bills or do they want to be reelected for office? Because they are not two different things.
Siri, one of the things that President Biden is talking about now in his plans for economic recovery is raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour. Now, I have a feeling I know what you're going to say about this, but do you feel that's a good idea? And let me say this too. I think he is putting emotion before merit related to this. I think it's a good soundbite, but I'm interested as to what your view of it is.
Yeah, I love that adjective emotion because I think all three of us and all of your viewers agree that everybody deserves a livable wage. I think one of the biggest mistakes Speaker Paul Ryan made was not focusing on the issue of working poor, because that totally dovetails into the Republican Party message, which is if you work hard, you'll make more money, right? Competition is good. And so, what a minimum wage of $15 wants to acknowledge is that people should have a fair wage. But you shouldn't mandate an employer pay $15 for somebody because they're just not going to hire them. If I have a choice of opening a restaurant in Texas with no minimum wage and a restaurant in New Jersey with a $15 minimum wage, I'm going to Texas. I'm from Texas. I love Texas. But hey, I'll take that no minimum wage.
Well, along those same lines, because I believe that as the minimum wage is being raised in many states across the country, it is incentivizing businesses to figure out how to either reduce or replace their workforce using technology. If you can get a robot without all of the HR and fringe benefit issues, that's the way to go. So, do you see us going in a direction where people may actually be paid to stay at home in the form of a universal income supplied by the federal government? Andrew Yang talked about this when he was running for president on the Democratic side. What's your feeling on that?
So, in the most bipartisan thing that I will say is I don't mind a universal basic income. I think the Andrew Yang idea is really interesting as long as you eliminate all social services in government. You get $1,200 a month, no more SNAP, no more unemployment, no more Medicare, no more Medicaid. You get your one chunk at government and that's it. And so I would rather trade $1,200 a month for every American than the massive amounts of money we spend on entitlements. We cannot pay $600 billion a year to subsidize Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So, hey, I'll give you $1,200 a month as long as you don't get anything else from government.
Very interesting.
Hey, Siri, as someone that's was in the administration, but also has been in Republican politics for some time now and made her way around the D.C. area, Where does the GOP go from here? I think a lot of us are licking our wounds these days. What's next? What as someone who is a voice that's heard inside of the party, what are you telling people?
I tell people the same thing day in, day out. And it's the same thing that I'm using in my search for the next opportunity, is that character matters. And so in order to have good character, you have to stand by your convictions. If you believe in something, you need to stand by it. Whatever you feel about former President Donald Trump, he had convictions. You heard it 20 times a day on Twitter before 12 noon. And so I think the Republican Party needs to understand that he had 76 million people vote for him because they liked his character, they liked his convictions. And so as long as the Republican Party chooses to compromise on things that they don't believe in, then the American voter will vote them out. So I really want to warn Kevin McCarthy and Mitch McConnell and Ronna McDaniels as they move towards potentially winning back Congress in 2022. The only thing that matters is that you believe in it and you believed in it.
And speaking of Donald Trump and now Citizen Trump, there's some talk out there that he is looking at forming a new political party. I believe the name that's been thrown out there has been the Patriot Party. What's your feeling on that? Because when it's happened in the past, if you look at Ross Perot, he certainly hurt George Bush Sr. And if you go way back to Teddy Roosevelt, when he started the Bull Moose Party, he opened the door for Woodrow Wilson, a Democrat, to beat an incumbent President Taft. So you think this is a good idea to have a third major political party?
I think it's a terrible idea for the very reason. I mean, Teddy Roosevelt created the Bull Moose Party because he wanted to run for president third time and they didn't give him the nomination. As much as people want to support Donald Trump, they kind of like the two-party system. They just want the system to work for them. And so the best thing that Donald Trump can do is expose how the Democrats continue to fail the Republican Party. And also, quite frankly, he needs to get better lawyers to beef up for 2024 election law fights.
Sery, you and I had the opportunity of meeting in the green room, doing interviews at Fox News at one time. That's how we got connected and became fast friends. But, we saw over the last 4 years, the media really take a different shift, almost creating a hostile environment, not just for the administration, but for pretty much anybody that disagreed with the message that they wanted out there. And so I'm just curious, as someone who's written policy and been part of policy making in her career, does the media now own the ability to shift legislation? And is that something we're likely going to see in a Biden administration?
I think the media does not, because what we saw during the Trump years is the collapse of the fourth estate. I mean, the media really had the height of its power during Bill Clinton's time when they were anti-Clinton and they were running all those pieces. But in the 30 years, what Trump showed is that you don't need media, you needed Twitter. He drove the narrative through Twitter, and he drove the narrative through a form that had nothing to do with the fourth estate. So what Trump and the Republican Party needs to recognize is who is the new power between 2020 and 2024. And I think that's an open-ended question, but I definitely don't think it's media because they're totally in the Democratic Party camp.
Well, we all know that legislating is hard, right? Campaigning is hard, but it's certainly easier than legislating. If we think back to even President Obama, when he had both chambers of Congress, President Bush for a period of time had both chambers of Congress, Donald Trump for a period of time had both chambers of Congress. Each of these presidents was really able to only do limited things legislatively. They did a lot of executive orders, but legislatively it was still difficult. If you're looking at the Biden camp right now, what do you think is the thing that Joe Biden goes after? What's his top legislative priority? And do you think there'll be more than one that he can actually get done?
Yeah, so those are three great questions. So one, I don't think he can get more than one thing done because he wasn't that successful in his 35 years as a United States Senator. Two, what is his top priority? Who knows? I mean, during the campaign, he was so amorphous. He was like a sticky tack board that you threw things on and just fell because it was no longer sticky. I mean, does he care about immigration? Does he care about a $15 minimum wage? Does he care about COVID? Does he care about women's empowerment? I don't know, because in his 35 years as a United States Senator, he didn't show any particular passion on these subjects. And those are the subjects driving politics right now. But the final thing that I would say about Joe Biden is, look, I mean, I think overall people think he's a nice guy, whatever that means. You know, the casual brush off after a terrible first date. He's a nice guy. He'll do whatever he wants to do. The real question is, what does Vice President Kamala Harris do? What does Speaker Pelosi do? Because those two women are running the world right now.
Siri, one final question. We're hearing about these quote unquote lists that are being made for people who were in the Trump administration, like the Lincoln Project. And it seems like its purposes is to identify people who were supportive of President Trump in his administration and trying to make, shall we say, life difficult for them. So as someone who is potentially in that situation, what's your feeling about that, and how concerned are you about, this McCarthyism that's building up around former President Trump?
Yeah, that's the exact time I was thinking of, is the time of Joseph McCarthy and these red lists. For me personally, I'm not worried because I think I'm a good person, I have good character, and I worked on the right issues. Who hates women's empowerment, right? I mean, who hates small business? So I think for me, it's easy to sell it. But the one piece of advice I gave to my friends in the Trump administration, and they ask me now for help in the private sector, is look, if you weren't good to people, they're not going to be good to you. And I think what the Lincoln Party is really looking at and what the media is really going after is there were people in the Trump administration who were not good. That's true of the Democratic Party. That's true of the Republican Party. So if you want to go after them, that's fine. But most political appointees and also most people who work on the Hill are very young. You know, they're like 25, 26, 27. They have their whole lives ahead of them. You have to remember people like Dick Cheney and Ron Klein, the new White House chief of staff, they started out in DC as young 20-something staffers too. To penalize somebody who is that young for the rest of their life, I think is a shame. And it says a lot more about the character of the Lincoln Project than it does about the people who chose to serve the country by working at the White House.
Wow, Sery, that was, thank you for saying what you just said. And thank you for being our guest today. Listen, as someone that knows you personally, I know your character, I know who you are, I know your brilliance too, but as an American citizen, thank you for your willingness to serve. I think that for a lot of people, answering that call, regardless of politics, is a duty that a lot of people take on, and certainly you should be lauded for it and awarded and praised for it, not censored or even banished for it. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much, and thanks so much for having me.
Hey, thanks for being here. You are always welcome at the BizPo Show, so don't be a stranger, and come back and see us real soon. Dan and I will be right back. Welcome back to the BizPo Show. Well, we have a new president, and with the new administration comes new executive orders. Whether it be ending the Keystone Pipeline, rejoining the Paris Accord, issuing a mask mandate, we now have a whole new list of rules and regulations we got to live by. So Dan, what do you think about this? Is this a natural rite of passage that if a new president comes into power, they have to draft up a bunch of executive orders on day one?
Yeah, so it seems. And what it signals to everybody, Seth, is I don't think I can get things done in Congress. So therefore, I got to use executive orders to try to get the things that many people don't agree with. And if we look at what his executive orders are about, here's what I want to ask. Where are you creating jobs? You talked about making America better, build back better. Okay, building back better to me means a first order here is let's get people back to work, because if we can get the economy rolling, other things will fall in line. And I don't see with all these executive orders how we're achieving that goal. Where are we creating jobs,
Well,
Seth?
listen,
Enlighten
yeah,
me.
I mean, listen, you bring it up. I don't know where we're creating jobs, and maybe in the environmental community. Are we joining the Paris Accord? Is that going to create new jobs in the green sector? Because I know that that was a pledge of the Obama administration that didn't really pan out, and maybe Biden is taking that back on. But specific to the Keystone Pipeline, that's doing the opposite effect. That's going to cost thousands of jobs, but it's also going to compound that problem because what it's going to do is increased energy costs. Who gets hurt the most by that? The lower and middle class, because the price of fuel goes up, the price of heating your home goes up, and even Justin Trudeau, the champion of the environment in Canada, is reaching out saying, this was a bad move, President Biden, please don't do this.
Well, and let me tell you again, to me, politics and campaigning about issues, it's always about hitting that emotional chord. So we've talked about the minimum wage, and the emotion behind the minimum wage is people need to make more money so they're not in poverty. Pull on the heartstrings. Then we say, well, we have to save the environment. So we need to go back into the Paris Climate Accord, or we need to stop the Keystone Pipeline. Well, is that really the truth of the matter? Are those the things that are really causing our world to be so bad? I don't think so. But that's the story that we hear about. So yes, the Keystone Pipeline is going to cost thousands of jobs. Is that the direction we want to go in? The Paris Climate Accord, let's answer this question. What are they doing to rein in China and India from polluting our planet? Because those two are doing most of the damage. Are we supposed to take on that burden? So what happens? They have cheap labor, they can outproduce us, and we have all these additional costs and can't be competitive because we're trying to save the environment. I got news for you, Seth. We can't do it alone. We're sharing that.
Well, that's right. And you bring up the Paris Climate Accord. And again, I'm all for protecting our environment. I think that's something that the Republican Party has missed on, is speaking intelligently around the environment in a way that is like, yeah, we need to protect this. I don't know any conservatives who say down with the environment, but that's the way that we're portrayed in the media. But here's the reality of it, and you hit the nail on the head. The U.S. is responsible for roughly 15% of the world's emissions. That's a lot for one country. But guess who's responsible for about double that? China, right? And so until these countries that are also supposed to be part of this program but aren't engaged in this program it is one of those things where we're sitting there going, it's putting us in a very difficult economic position to be the only ones doing these things. The second piece of that is, while I'm all in favor of green energy and green products and saving the environment, the reality is those products and services, they tend to cost more. And who does that hurt? The lower and middle class. And so when you're doing that combined with the Keystone Pipeline that we've already talked about and the thousands of jobs that are going to be lost there, the additional cost to the energy sector, that's a double whammy for these folks and really a double whammy for our entire economy. But here's the other side of this, and nobody's really answered this question. We aren't energy independent, and we aren't, we are not in a position where we can just end our need for fossil fuels. So what's going to happen to get these products, these fossil fuels from point A to point B? Trucks and trains. We're going to be literally shipping this in a way that is not friendly to the environment, extensively less friendly to the environment than a pipeline. And I think that's a bigger thing that nobody seems to want to talk about.
Well, look, we have a new president, and whether you voted for Joe Biden or not, all of us should come together and be rooting for the guy and his administration. We are Americans before we are Republicans and Democrats, and we lose sight of that somehow. So coming from the place of wanting Joe Biden to be successful, he said that he has the ability to reach out to all these nations, which he felt Trump did not do a good job on. So let's get out there, go talk to President Xi of China, and reach out to the leaders in India and have the discussion about the environment. Let's see how he does. I hope he's successful. I don't think he will be, but I certainly hope he does for all of our benefit.
Hey, I'll join you in that, my friend. I do also echo your sentiments of we need President Biden to be successful for America. We are Americans first. And so hopefully, whether it be the economy, whether it be the environment, but hopefully we don't try to isolate each of those two in their own sectors and recognize that it's all conjoined. We need both to do well. And for both to do well, America will do well. Well, when we come back, Dan and I will give you our final thoughts.
Welcome back to the BizPo Show. Each week, Seth and I close out the show with our final thoughts, something we've been thinking about and want to share. So Seth, what are your final thoughts for this week?
Well, Dan, this week as Joe Biden took office, he spent his first day in the Oval signing executive orders, and it got me thinking, what's the real power behind executive orders? I mean, don't get me wrong, I know they have power. I mean, they are a directive from the most powerful office in the world, but they also have an expiration date. Executive orders are not legislation, but it seems like in this era of nonpartisanship in Washington, it's led us to the executive branch spending more time signing orders than maybe it should collaborating with Congress. In turn, executive orders have significantly temporarily impacted those things that could have long-lasting effects on things like our economy. We needn't look further than the Keystone Pipeline, which we just spent some time talking about, to find a sector of our economic system that has invested billions of dollars and thousands of jobs based on one executive order, only to lose those things based on another executive order. Listen, I recognize that executive orders aren't going away. But if every 4 years we run the risk of massive shifts in our lives based on their impact, perhaps it's time to rethink them or maybe even limit them. But that's probably about as likely to happen as congressional term limits. So Dan, what's on your mind this week?
Well, Seth, as we saw this past week with the peaceful transition of power in Washington, D.C., I actually started thinking about the first time we had this situation, which was when George Washington was leaving as our first president and transitioning over to John Adams. And in Washington's farewell address, he warned us over 2 centuries ago about loyalty to party before loyalty to country. And we see this playing out all over the place. It has become so ingrained in all of us about, well, what side are you on? Are you red or are you blue? And this is exactly what Washington warned us about. He was against having political parties for what we see playing out right now. So can't we all look at this situation and say, we have a new president. We want him to be successful. He's a Democrat. But if you're a Republican or belong to some other party, so what? Our country was built on having arguments. But in the end, the voters decide, and they've decided on a direction for this country. Let's get behind it. Let's try to make it work. And as we know, every 4 years, there's an election for president. And if we don't like the direction that we're going in, no need for revolution. We simply go to the voting booth. So let's keep that in mind the next time you're feeling angry. It's all about country. Well, that does it for this week in this edition of the BizPo Show. We hope you enjoyed the program, and we hope you're telling your friends about it, and we sure hope you tune in again next week. From New York City, I'm Dan Geltrude.
From Dallas, Texas, I'm Seth Denson. Good night.